I'm joined now, of course, by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell, live from Sydney. Well, it's sort of been eclipsed a bit by the fires over summer, mate, but going into Christmas, the big issue for the government, yes, it was about getting things like the Medivac and its legislative agenda through the Parliament, but the big issue in personnel terms was Angus Taylor. You interviewed him today. There's an update in relation to the issue regarding Clover Moore. What can you tell us?
Well, he was in the papers today, I guess, because he didn't provide information regarding a Freedom of Information request. But what's happened in the last couple of weeks is the New South Wales Police have flicked this to the Australian Federal Police for them to evaluate whether there should be an investigation. New South Wales Police's argument is if an offence did occur, it would have occurred in Canberra, in which case it's not in their jurisdiction. So now the AFP's got the hot potato. I'm sure it's the last thing, Peter, that they want to deal with. And one way or another, I think Angus Taylor will be cleared. I've been saying all along, I don't think a criminal offence has happened here. The only point of contention seems to be his insistence early on, which he was standing by today, that it was a mistake that he came up with these doctored figures, that a staff member did not bodgy them up or do something unusual with them, that they were actually printed off the City of Sydney website, even though the City of Sydney says they've searched their server and it wasn't there. So that's kind of the point of contention on this one. The problem for Angus Taylor, I guess, is he's been marked as accident-prone by the opposition, but what we know about this scandal at the moment, I don't think there's reason for him to go. I think, in a week and a half's time, Bridget McKenzie will be under a lot more pressure than Angus Taylor.
Yeah, I'm interested to see whether or not you think, and there's been discussions today, I listened to an interview from Anne Toomey, a constitutional lawyer, in relation to the legality, the head of power. So critical was the Auditor General over the lack of head of power. This is the capacity of the minister to spend the money that was in the budget for these sports grants. I listened to an interview from Anne Toomey who says there's real legal doubt now about these grants, and I'm assuming the money's well spent now. So $100 million probably could be illegally spent by the minister. Where is this all going to end? Because Parliament returns very shortly in February, and then the Senate goes into Senate estimates, which is, the Q&A session for people who haven't watched it, that's held for Senate ministers. Bridget McKenzie has nowhere to hide when we get into Senate estimates. What do you make of it all?
I think the government will bleed over this for weeks, and I'm sure the opposition will be attempting as hard as they can to make sure that's the case. But I don't know what happened there with the Auditor General, Peter, because I, like you, no doubt, have seen a few of these reports over the years where they criticise the grants, they make out that they're political, but rarely does a report go this far. And what it said was that the Auditor General's office took sworn testimony from two members of her staff that apart from gathering all the eligible grants up and deciding them themselves and ignoring the department, they had lists of marginal seats and target seats, which, just illustrates it's political. But the crushing blow in it, which you refer to with Anne Toomey, is saying she might not have had legal authority to disperse these monies. So the Auditor General's got to be in the bonnet over this, and it's either because it disgusted him at the time or, something's happened investigating, which is, annoyed him, quite frankly. But either way, it's a real pickle for the Morrison government.
Yeah, look, I've been involved in plenty of these grant programs that run into an election cycle too. So let's be very clear, this is not a new way to dispense money. But what seems to be new to me is that there wasn't sufficient advice coming up from the department. This is not the opposition coming up with an idea and trying to implement it in government. This was a government taking an idea to an election. So I'm a bit bemused that there doesn't seem to be enough advice coming up from the department to the minister about how to do it inside the rules with all the appropriate probity. Or there was advice and for some reason it was rejected. There were attempts today to drag in other political players inside the Liberal Party. Let's be very clear. Labor for a long time has danced around the edges on this stuff. I did a radio interview yesterday with Graham Richardson. He said on air, I'm not repeating anything out of school, that when he was the sports minister in the previous Labor administration, if you weren't his mate, you didn't get money. So Isn't it a bit of pox on both their houses out of this?
Yeah, but the public don't like it either way, do they? I mean, they don't want to see that kind of thing. It's interesting what you say about the advice. So, in the first round of funding, according to the report, there was a recommendation from Sport Australia of 426, which they gave the tick to, the Sport Australia board grants. And the report says that the Minister's office never got that advice. Instead, they said, give us the 2,054 applications. So what I would put to you, Peter, is someone from the Minister's office has telephoned the department and said, oh, we don't want your recommendations, we'll do it ourselves. So they didn't want the advice, that's the bottom line. And that, I guess, as you're pointing out, exposes Bridget McKenzie somewhat. I mean, look, we've got all this discussion about how much did the Prime Minister's office know, they must have been involved, I suspect they were. But if Bridget McKenzie's office and the Minister have been sloppy in terms of the legality of the thing, well, that's something she can be hung over, I guess. We'll have to see what emerges in coming weeks.
Yeah, well, let me give you a bit of advice. Every brief from every department into every Minister's office is tracked by departmental liaison officers. They're called DLOs. They're tracked by number, they're tracked going in, they're tracked on whose desk they sit on, and they're tracked when they're signed off by the Minister or not, and then returned to the department. So a bit of forensic work by a few journalists down in Canberra, and you might get some answers there. But it is very interesting, I think, that they chose to put the money in the purview of the Sports Commission, which has an independent remit. If it had gone anywhere else, you know, if they'd set up a special agency inside the department, the Minister would have had the ability to have more discretion. But someone, for whatever reason, chose the Sports Commission independent. I think that's going to be where all the difficulty is. As you said, it's not going to go away. I'm sure we'll keep returning to this issue over and over again. I want to move on. It seems the Reserve Bank of Australia got some free advice overnight about climate change and buying coal-fired power stations. Fill me in.
Yeah, it was Bank of International Settlements report suggesting that things could get so bad in terms of climate change or adjusting to climate change that the RBA and other such banks might have to actually buy out power stations and that sort of thing. Not taking this one too seriously, but ironically this report kind of goes to the Morrison argument about having a balance, I reckon, Peter, because on the one hand they're saying climate change events could cause serious problems to the world economy, and yet on the other hand they're saying if you move too quickly towards renewables from coal or these other sources, that could cause significant problems for the world's economy, like a GFC type situation. So then Morrison says we need a balance. Well, what better argument, really, which is you've got to move away from those traditional sources, but not too quickly. Either thing can upset the economy, actually, the events themselves or how you deal with them.
Yeah, well, look, as we saw going into the end of last year, coal export data came out. It showed how much the Australian economy, the Australian budget, in terms of trade, rely on coal. There was also projected, this is not government data, this is international trade data, projected increases for the export of coal out of Australia, particularly to economies in our Asian region. I know, having done budgets before, how important resources broadly is to making us pay our way. So, you know, I think you look at all these reports today, there are also claims by CEOs that they're all worried about climate change in a survey, but it's a balancing act. I mean, I'm also suspecting if you ask them, are you worried about fronting your AGM and telling your shareholders that you can't make a profit anymore, they would be similarly concerned about that.
Yeah, and look, you can argue about new jobs in renewables, and I think there's opportunity there, but that ain't going to happen in a year, and that's going to happen over 20. So, I mean, there's a reason Scott Morrison keeps saying an $80 billion a year industry about coal. He's saying, look, you know, the danger is with Labor. They'll shut it down overnight or shut it down too quickly, and not to mention what that would do to our power prices. So he's using the term balance. I guess he needs to keep using it.
Yeah, and look, politically, you know this as well as I do. The play out in Queensland, particularly in regional communities, in seats that Labor would need to win if government was to change hands, coal and resources, gas exports, etc., they're all still very potent issues, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, you take Queensland out of the federal election and it's 53 coalition seats, 62 Labor. You take Victoria out, who they seem to be exercised about climate change, it's heading in the other direction. So, you know, Scott Morrison is dependent on Queensland to be in power. He has Queensland's interests at heart, especially regional Queensland and regional Australia, and he's going to keep defending those interests. Now, I felt with that interview with Angus Taylor today, there was certainly, he made it very clear, despite, you know, what certain left Liberal MPs are saying, there's going to be no move on the emissions reduction target as such. But he certainly allowed a bit of wriggle room in terms of not having to use the carryover credits in order to hit that target in 2030 of 26% reduction. So there's a middle course through here. There's a way to show the government's doing more on renewable energy, but there is, you know, also you've got to look after that coal industry.